Well, originally I was going to talk a little bit about thunderstorms this week, but then the heat wave happened. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about, what's with this heat this week on today's episode of In the Clouds. Well, hello everyone and welcome to In the Clouds this week. We'll be talking about what caused this heat wave and why it felt a little bit different than some of the ones we've had in the past. But before I get into some of the explanation, I want to take you a little bit through the timeline that we had with this system. Now, it all started last week when our last cold front moved through the region on Thursday the 19th. On Friday, we started seeing some high pressure started moving into the area last Friday, and then it just began building and building and building over the next few days, and our temperatures started to increase. Now, by the time we got to Monday, the heat dome was in full spread. It encompassed much of the eastern half of the United States and even getting up towards Canada, where a stationary front attached to a low pressure center was just hanging around to the north. Now, Monday and Tuesday were the peak of this system. Once we got to about Tuesday and Wednesday, things started to shift a little bit. The stationary front very slowly moved to the south and kind of started squishing the high pressure system. We were still quite hot and we were still under danger of getting to really high heat index values, but we weren't quite peaked. The whole thing, the entire heat dome peaked on Tuesday, which was our hardest day of the week and of the entire year. Now, flashing forward into the future, throughout the weekend and into next week, we'll start seeing a new frontal system begin to form, and this will begin to push the heat dome off to the east. Now, once we get that through, that cold front will start bringing a little bit of a change to our weather. We're still under that heat dome for the next few days, and we'll also still see some showers and thunderstorms, possibly even a severe storm. But once this cold front comes through on Tuesday, July 1st, we will start seeing a bit of a difference. A new high pressure will start moving into the area next Wednesday and Thursday, but the difference between this one and the one we've had with this heat wave is things are going to be a little bit drier. There won't be nearly as much humidity, which is really what drove this heat wave that we have been in for nearly a week now. Now, humidity is based on temperature and the dew point temperature. We've talked about dew point temperature a little bit this week, but the dew point temperature in terms of an actual definition is the mark where the air is 100% saturated or 100% humid. That's basically, you see really dense fog or it's just raining. Now, higher humidity leads to warmer feels-like temperatures, especially in the summer. Humidity doesn't affect the cold, but really only the warm. Now, Tuesday was the peak of the entire heat wave. Tuesday had a high of 93 degrees according to the Mid-Ohio Valley Airport and a humidity of just about 50%. That humidity led to a heat index of 100. It felt 7 degrees warmer than it actually was. But if the humidity was only 10% higher, up to 60%, that heat index would have jumped to 107. And the hotter it gets, the hotter that air temperature gets, the more that humidity affects the heat index. The good news is we're only seeing humidity for the next few days. Air temperature is coming down mostly into those upper 80s, so the heat index will only be into about the mid 90s. It'll still be hot, and you still will want to take some precautions, but it's not quite dangerous. But you can see the point where that cold front starts to come through next week, and our dew point temperatures will plummet well down into the upper 50s, low 60s, rather than what we've been dealing with for the entire week in those upper 60s and mostly low to maybe even mid 70s. Now, the other thing that we look at sometimes with that heat dome is that high pressure. Pressure is often described using mean sea level pressure. That is basically the pressure of an area moved down to sea level. We are not at sea level. We're about 600–700 feet above the ocean. So our pressure is a little bit different than what it is at the ocean, but we use an equation to take that down to mean sea level pressure, so we have a consistent basis across the entirety of the nation and really the world. Now, there are two scales that measure pressure. You have millibars and inches of mercury. A lot of people sometimes will know that about 29.92 inches of mercury is standard pressure. In millibars, that is 1,013.25 millibars. But millibars is basically an easier system for us to use in place of the actual scientific thought, what we all use in math, which is pascals. It's basically the force of the atmosphere pushing down on us. The actual unit for that is 101,325 pascals. That's a really big number for just how much the air is pushing down on us. And it's pushing down on us a lot. But we use the other system, the millibars, or in general, just to make it a little bit easier to comprehend. Now, think of pressure as a little bit of a blanket. The heat waves and heat domes form when that high pressure stalls and begins to build up. Now, the high pressure acts a little bit, or I mean just pressure in general, acts a little bit like a blanket, like this fleece blanket right here. The pressure, that blanket sits right on top of you, or well, on top of my face, really. But there's a normal amount of blankets, but that high pressure basically acts like more blankets being put on top of you. And what happens when you have more blankets on top of you? Well, you feel warmer, especially at night during the winter. Now, when too many of those start popping up, temperatures skyrocket quite a bit. Most of the time, heat waves have mostly dry air. But because of the way that the high pressure was bringing that warm, moist air from the Gulf and through the southern states up to our area, that's what really pushed our temperatures and our heat indices up towards the triple digits. Now, for a time, we saw plenty of heat advisories and extreme heat warnings with a lot of, well, issues in general. So this used to be purple. We used to be under an extreme heat warning. That expired, but these heat advisories expanded nearly the entirety of the eastern half of the United States, barring some areas really far north or right at the Gulf Coast and most of Florida. So it was really hot this week, but if you took away that humidity and brought it down to what a normal heat wave usually looks like, that drier weather, we probably wouldn't have had those heat waves, those heat advisories and extreme heat warnings, or at least they wouldn't have lasted as long as they have. But that humidity really drove up those heat indices into, those dangerous levels. Now, barring anything that happens in the next couple of weeks, next time I'll finally actually talk about thunderstorms, which we still get because, it's summertime, it's warm, it'll sometimes be humid, and we'll have some thunderstorms. But you'll have to wait a little bit for that. So, thank you very much for watching today's episode of In the Clouds.